So my goal starting out in this match is to push the left side since the rest of my team was actively in these areas over here. One thing about winning that I've noticed a lot more lately since I've been playing a lot more WARNO, especially in 2v2s and 1v1s, is the game is really decided in the first, I'll say 20 minutes, really the first 15. The reason I say that is because if you do not press your opponent in under 15 minutes and make some kind of significant gains, you will ultimately get to a point where the fight becomes a battle of attrition. The key to winning is to force your opponent to use their resources or their points on units that are inexpensive, or more so on infantry and smaller assets. Because if you allow your enemy to get dug in and build a defense early on, what tends to happen is, let me pause this, what tends to happen is that's when you'll start to see higher end units enter the battlefield, like T80s, high end 2A4s, just higher tier units in general, and that's what creates a situation where you're bogged down and it becomes, like I said, a stalemate or a battle of attrition. And at that point, any kind of maneuverability that you would like to have early in the game to maneuver around the flanks, just pincer or whatever it is that you want to do, pretty much gets eliminated because you're fighting an enemy that's dug in mass. And I'm going to explain this as this battle goes on so you can kind of get an understanding of what I mean by you want to force your opponent to use resources on smaller subunits early on. So I have about 2 platoons of infantry, and I have a rocket artillery to help with this push, as well as 2 shilkas and some man pads and 2 tanks. This is I guess a deck, not even a deck, a formation that's geared towards actively pushing to gain ground early on. I'm not worried about defense. So the opponent tries, or I'm in a 10v10, and the opponent tries to do a heli rush. The usual.
Klasse, Ziel zerstört. Feind vernichtet. Haben wir noch eine Frage, nicht das aus. Feind vernichtet. Готовьтесь, противник замечен. Klasse, Ziel zerstört.
So even though this situation is currently going on, this does not stop me from doing what I need to do because I'm not worried about it. I know they're trying to cap this point so they can spawn and use it. It's a really cheap, cool tactic, I guess, but it's futile.
Wir wollen Ziele zerstören. Ende.
Now I've got my mortar set up. I want to smoke out this tree line here, and I want to make sure I get my man pads up into the front, because what you're trying to do is prep them, is have some kind of air cover or net for the incoming attack helicopters that are going to inevitably be sent to stop your push. And I just find that man pads are better for this than armored AA. And I'm going to show this from the opponent's point of view so you can see what I mean by forcing your opponent to react with lighter units. So I have my rocket artillery, and I don't have any recon here. I just know there's probably some units in this area, so I hit this area just to soften it up for my attack. What tends to happen in multiplayer is you'll get situations where you have an enemy that's bogged into the forest. Now you're slugging it out in the forest, and then the game lasts a whole hour because you're trying to clear out all this area, yada yada yada. If you want to stop an opponent from being dug in, you have to attack and fix them early in the game. The opponent can't work their way into a forest and spread out and bog you down if they're worried about defending their front line. So you want to get to the entries of the forest quick and prevent the enemy from pushing, but that's another point. So now this is the assault here. Two platoons of infantry, one platoon of armored BTRs, some manpads pushing up to cover for the inevitable Apache or whatever helicopters are going to come in, and T-55s to come in and help with counter infantry. Another thing is, when you use tanks in IFVs, they're not meant to kill other tanks. Like I guess you see a lot of in WARNO. Tanks are meant to assist your infantry with combating other infantry and lightly armored vehicles. If you get into a point in a game where it's a huge tank battle, then you've taken too long to seize opportunity to cover more ground, and that's not going to be a winning fight, because eventually you get to a point where you're fighting T-80s, 2A4s, and all these high-end tanks, and it's just not it's not a fight that you want to take on if your objective is to move and command a lot of ground early. And this is what I meant by the inevitable helicopters that are going to come in to try and stop the push. So by creating problems for the opponent early on that involves ground game and infantry, your opponent's gonna have to make a decision. Do I invest my resources in high tier units like helicopters or tanks, or do I just buy more infantry? And by doing that, you prevent the battle from getting to a point where you're fighting these high resource vehicles that are going to bog you down and prevent you from moving freely. And that leads to the game lasting an hour and what have you, because now it's just a giant battle of who can pop out the most tanks, and that's not how you want to you want the game to progress. So you have at least 15 minutes into a game to really get some form of offense going, and if you don't, it's just going to be a long game of attrition. This is how you're supposed to use tanks. They're force multipliers, but they're not meant to be going head to head with other tanks in that sense. And what this does now is I've created a breakthrough. How can I show this? That makes sense. So now what this does is I've created a breakthrough on their flank here, and they're gonna have to reinforce this, which allows my teammate here, who wasn't really moving much at all anyway, but it allows him to push in, as well as my teammates over here to push in, and it creates almost like a pincer-like motion, because this player can't extend this way or this way because of the threat over here. So eventually he's going to get cut off from the flank, and that's going to be all she wrote. And now my opponent, like I said earlier, you force them to invest in lighter units. He doesn't have the resources to pool to fight this now, because you have to let all that build back up. And so instead of bringing in tanks to fight my armor and having to worry about, M1 HAs or what have you coming in, he needs to worry about getting infantry in. So that's what I mean by keeping your opponent from using higher end resources to fight you. That's how you prevent your units from getting bogged down. That leads to an inevitable battle of attrition and a giant tank spam because they have so much money to pool in, and that's what you want to prevent. But this was really just more so my, let me see. This is more so just my doing at this point. Because if I wouldn't have pushed this aggressively, our teammates really would not have done much of anything, unfortunately. Because I solo pushed this by myself and created this breakthrough that then allowed my teammates to kind of move a little more freely. But that really just comes with experience and playing, honestly, 1v1s, 2v2s, and 3v3s, because it teaches you phases of attack. I was trying to get my teammates to actually take advantage of this, but what you'll notice is sometimes your teammates won't actually grasp the initiative of when to attack, because most people don't quite have an understanding of when to do anything in WARNO, really. But that kind of just comes with time, and I'm still a new player, but I recognize phases of attack. I can see when we've already lost a game, which is funny because some players will be like, "Hey man, what are you doing?" I'm like, "Yo, we pretty much lost already because all the initiatives that we had, nobody capitalized on them." But all that really just comes with time.
Der ging fast durch! Wir haben keine Munition mehr!
Another key thing with breakthroughs is once you do create it, you have to keep flooding the gap with units and keep bringing in infantry to secure that foothold that you have. Which is why I said in my last video, when you want to create a breakthrough or push a point, you need at least 2 platoons of infantry, max 3. Because the first phase creates the breakthrough, the second fills in the gap as a reserve to push through, and then the third is your, basically almost like your defense.
Feind gesichtet! Gefechtsbereitschaft herstellen!
And that's pretty much it. This player, I think he surrendered already, I'm not sure. But there's not much else he can do. Investing in helicopters isn't going to help because they're just going to get shot down. He can't really invest in tanks because he needs infantry to take the ground he's lost. So since he can't invest in tanks, he can't bring in any armor to combat my I don't know where they are, my T-55s, which aren't the best tanks, even though I have them up-vetted, but he can't counter them with better tanks because he has to focus on infantry. And as you can see, he can't do that because he doesn't have the funds. But hopefully this was good. This is how you defeat and create a breakthrough in less than 8 minutes. The cool thing about this is when you take the initiative like this, like I mentioned earlier, you don't have to worry about getting bogged down in the forest and the enemy flooding in because you've knocked off their route of entry early on. Like I said, your battles that tend to last long on forested maps are because you went in with the mindset of let me go in defensively, and that's what leads to games lasting forever.